Hey everybody, welcome to the Orange and Brown Talk podcast. Our week of draft recap pods continues. So now we're turning things over to Tim Bielik and Lance Reisland here, who of course you listen to all throughout the draft process. Every Friday, they were on the pod. We went through a bunch of guys. This was a big draft for Lance Reisland. We're going to get to a lot of that. So yeah, and Lance, I actually had like our text subscribers, our football insiders. I'd look in the replies every now and again, and completely unprompted, they'd be like, "Hey, wasn't he one of Lance's guys?" and all of that. So folks were listening, folks were paying attention, and this was a very Lance Reisland draft, starting off at the very top. So let's just get to it. Let's go through these picks. Let's get thoughts on them. Some of the decisions the Browns made. And so at the very top of the draft, at number 2 overall, the Browns decide to trade out of the opportunity to take Travis Hunter. Tim, you and I talked about that on Thursday night after round 1 ended. And then they trade back and take Mason Graham. So Lance, we're just going to get this out of the way. We're just gonna clear out. This is Donovan Mitchell, LeBron James, 10 seconds on the shot clock. We're going to clear out. We're going to let you tell us why the Browns did the right thing and took the right player with Mason Graham.
Well, going into it, obviously we had all three of us had talked, you guys were high on Mason Graham as well. So it was kind of a collective effort there. I liked Hunter just for what he brought in terms of getting yards. However, the Browns, after the fact, the Browns kind of showed me that they have two things in mind. One is they need to get tougher, right? So those first 3 picks for me, they got tougher. And Mason Graham kind of leads that, right? So losing Dalvin Thompson, as I felt, was a much bigger deal than people had thought it would be, because he's boring and he takes on those double teams. Mason Graham is a three down guy, 320 pounds, who can take on those double teams on first and second down, but he can also stay on the field on third down. So that gives you obviously some more flexibility with your roster. But when you watch him on film, he's absolutely a destroyer, right? So 2 things. I saw something that was really interesting this morning. He is a productive guy. And if you look at the Browns, they went all production. You had 4 conference MVPs. You had guys who just make plays. And for me, it's always going to be production over potential. Now, you got to have some potential because of the size and speed of these guys. But for me, the draft was, man, they got guys who can play. And obviously Mason Graham was number 1 on my list. So I'm very happy that they went with him. But I really think it shores up that middle of that. So the other part of it, finishing that up, is that without getting the receiver, getting Mason Graham and Schlesinger, they said, you know what? And the 2 backs, we're going to run the ball and we're going to stop the run. And so now for me, the next step will be when we get to camp is, are they more physical in practice? Because that's the next step, because that's what they don't do right now. So they kind of made an effort to get those physical guys. Mason Graham is the most physical, disruptive defensive tackle. And as much as you want that flashy edge rusher, that inside guy is the hardest guy to block for an offensive coordinator. He's the hardest guy to help with. He messes up all the schemes. And, people, not everybody was happy with the pick. And many people told me, he had 9 sacks. And for me, it's just a disruption. It's throwing off guards. It's screwing up double teams. It's protecting linebackers. For me, I think the most overrated, this will not make many people happy, but the most overrated stat in football is a sack. And people are like, why is that? It's pressure. Do you make that quarterback get out of rhythm? Do you make him throw when he's not supposed to? And the fastest way to do that is A and B gap, and that's where Mason Graham's coming from, stopping the run, rushing the passer. I'll get off my soapbox now, but I'm a big I think Mason Graham was a really, really, really good, clean pick for the Browns.
So, Tim, circling back, obviously we talked about it Thursday night, but we didn't have the context of the rest of the draft as well, and what the Browns did in this draft, which... Listen, it's interesting. They end up using both of those Jacksonville picks actually on their running backs. But how did anything change? I don't know if change is the right word, but did it adjust your thinking at all about what the Browns did Thursday night as the rest of the draft played out for them?
Yeah, definitely. And I think what it brought me back to was, I can't remember who wrote this on the staff, so I apologize if I'm forgetting who it was. It may have been Terry, I think. But the idea of when Kevin Stefanski came in as a head coach, the idea of being tough, smart, and accountable. And I feel like you saw that so many times in this draft, either all 3 or at least 2 of the 3. And then I go back to Mason Graham in particular. And yeah, he is all 3 of those, because if you look at where Michigan is, what made Michigan turn itself around over the last 4 years, toughness was a big part of it. And I think that's Mason Graham to a T. I mean, you want to talk about a tough guy. Lance, you talked last week about the wrestling background of Mason Graham, just wrestlers are such different personalities. I've covered the state wrestling tournament for, I think, the last 11 years or so that they've had it. It's a different environment. Those are different kids wired a different way. And you see that in the way Mason Graham plays, absolute relentlessness. And what I think the initial thought is when you draft a defensive tackle, people are like, oh, he's just going to be a run stuffer. He's not a 3-down player. He is a 3-down player. Like, he can play all 3 downs. Even looking at his PFF numbers, a pass rush win rate of 13.8%, which is outstanding for a defensive tackle. Run stop rate 12%, 20 pressures last season for a Michigan team that faced a lot more, that wasn't it always winning a lot of games. So they were facing fewer passes than they were the year prior when they were blowing teams out basically for most of that 2023 season. And with Mason Graham, I mean, the guy is almost unblockable one-on-one, and he's going to go into a situation where, by the way, you have the best defensive end in football in Myles Garrett, who's going to draw all that attention, and that's going to free Mason Graham up in the middle to create some havoc. And if Mason Graham can be what he has been in Michigan the last 2 seasons, which is the best player on that Michigan defense, the best player in that championship defense was Mason Graham. If he can be that in the NFL between Myles Garrett and either Mike Hall or Malik Collins, you really have the makings of a potentially dominant defensive line.
Yeah, so I thought about this on Friday because I was putting together a clip off of when Tim and I talked on Thursday night. I was putting together a clip for social. And one of the things I said about them trading out of number 2 is you passed on potentially elite talent to take a good player in Mason Graham. But when I kind of listened back to that, Lance, I thought to myself, Mason Graham probably could fall in that category of being an elite talent. Obviously, it's not the sexiest position. It's not considered one of the like priority positions, or when you look at the positional value, although I think it's raising. We're seeing them get paid more. We're seeing teams pay more attention to them. But defensive tackle, obviously, from a positional value standpoint, doesn't carry the same weight. But there is a case to be made that maybe along with Travis Hunter and Abdul Carter, at least to some degree, we should have been talking about Mason Graham as one of the elite talents in this draft.
Well, the reason I really liked him is kind of whatever all of us said for a month leading up to the draft is he causes so many issues inside. Now, as good as Myles Garrett is, and he's legit, you can actually make a plan for him. Doesn't mean the plan's going to work. I used to do that all the time. I make a plan, it didn't work. But you can make a plan for him. You can also throw away from a corner. You can also put a receiver in the slot. Not saying you're going to get him open, but you can create a plan. If you're a zone, like for example, if you're running zone at Mason Graham, he's going to make sure on first down, he's going to make sure that double team doesn't get to your linebackers. So now the linebackers are clean. Now he can get in that B gap. He can even go out to the 5 technique if you think Myles Garrett is going to be a matchup at the guard. Now, what really most NFL teams like to run slide protection, right? So they're going to slide that, especially against an even front. They're going to slide that center 2 miles aside. So I think the Browns, a lot of times, especially in passing downs, they're going to put Graham at the opposite 3 technique. And they're going to know that center is going to slide to Myles. Now that's a true one-on-one for Mason Graham against guards who usually don't have really good lateral movement. And as I start to get clips, on Mason Graham, the more and more you see him when he's in that B gap because of his weight, he is impossible to block for a guard. They can't slide to him, and they're always kind of like catching his shoulder, and he doesn't get there all the time. But play after play after play, you see the quarterback, his clock is sped up, and that's what really screws up an offense. So you can't down block him in the gap scheme. Double teams, he's going to anchor in there, take both guys. He can pass rush with those grid feet. And Tim, you said it best. Wrestlers are just wired different. They are different humans. They're like hockey players. They're just tough guys who like that. They like that physicality. He's really good in traffic. I just think it's a great pick. And I think, that was kind of my thing is that I thought nothing against Hunter, nothing against Carter. I just thought he was in that same boat as he can be a game wrecker.
I got 2 thoughts on that as well. First off, when I just go particularly with Mason Graham, all the experts, I think you can basically say he was a consensus top 5 pick. I don't think there was anybody who for a while outside of maybe a couple mocks at the very end had him outside the top 5 or 6. Like Will Campbell and Ashton Genty were kind of interchangeable. So even rewatching the ESPN broadcast, they're basically saying, Mason Graham was the last of the consensus top 5 guys to go, and he went 5th overall. And number 2, this is kind of the epiphany I literally just had, which is kind of fun of podcasting, is I've talked so much this draft cycle about the renaissance of the run game, and maybe it's serendipitous how this kind of fell for the Browns. But if you're thinking about the renaissance of the running game and the fact that you just had the Baltimore Ravens in your division set the record for most yards per carry as a team over the course of a season, you want to be ahead of the curve. And I think that's also kind of plays into Carson Schwarzenegger, who we'll talk about later, getting better at stopping the run and then, trying to get out ahead of that curve. And his teams are going to run the ball more. Stopping the run is going to be much more important. And here you have the best run stopping defensive tackle in this draft, and easily the best defensive tackle that's been available since Jalen Carter 2 years ago in your lap, in addition to picking up a first round pick for 2026.
Okay, now counterpoint here. As we sit here, Travis Hunter is a Jacksonville Jaguar. Really, what it comes to mind for me thinking about the sport of football, and really the power of the game itself, as its capacity to ignite belief in ourselves, belief in achieving what many deem impossible. Travis Hunter, he embodies belief. He's a rare person, he's a rare player, but he's also a reminder that the boundaries of the game of football were built to be challenged. And so the decision to select him was actually a statement. I stole that from Joey Gladstone.
I was going to say, did you write that down?
I stole that from I actually don't even know his first name. What's
Gladstone?
Yeah, I know the last name is Gladstone. I don't remember his first name, so that says a lot about James Gladstone. That's what it is. James Gladstone, the Jaguars GM.
That was well done, Dan. Well done.
I was going to say, behind the curtain, I texted that to all our reporters on Friday while we had the break. I'm like, I've never heard a GM speak like this. Usually in GM press conferences like this, you say, oh, we think this guy's an incredible person. We think he's going to fit in the culture of our program. We like, his mentality, his athletic tools, blah, blah, blah. This is the first time I've ever heard a GM talk about a player like he's giving an Oscar speech.
Yeah. And I think I responded in that text, like more and more we're hearing these GMs, and actually Liam Cohen during his introductory press conference too. It sounds like they're giving these TED Talks when they sit up there. That's exactly what this sounded like. Lance, we didn't get to talk to you on Thursday. I know you're doing the Sports for CLE live coverage with Dave Bacon. So you looked good, by the way.
Well, thank you.
You had the jacket on. You
tried to clean up. I try to clean up nice. I'm face for radio, so I try to clean up as best I can.
When you look at the decision to trade away from Travis Hunter, just what were your thoughts on the Browns? Obviously, it worked out them getting Mason Graham, which I know you're a fan of, but just the risk, I guess, of trading away from Travis Hunter.
Well, it is a risk, right? So you got a guy, especially if you use on offense, there's a lot of holes on the Browns team, right? And that guy, that ability to get easy yards has been one of the things I've said for a long time. The Browns offensively have had to be perfect for 10 to 12 plays. And everybody saw that last year. And, and when you have to go 10 to 12 to 15 plays every time, you're going to get a hold, you're going to get an offside. That's at every level of football. And every offensive coordinator will tell you it's sometimes nice to just do it wrong. Right. And when I used to be an offense coordinator, even at the high school level, I would show my entire staff like really bad plays. And it goes back to what I've said, Dan, you maybe have heard this from me, but it's players over plays, right? So there's times where we wouldn't block anybody. It was a terrible call. And one of our running backs would just go 80. And we did absolutely nothing right. And that, for me, that's one of the things you lose out on a Travis Hunter is his ability just to say, you know what, let's throw it out there one-on-one. And maybe he breaks a hitch and maybe he takes it to the house. And those are kind of things that get you big plays. And the Browns are still in that boat. Now, like I said, I think going back to the draft, going back to the entire draft, they said, we're going to stop the run and we're going to run the ball. But that idea of having a player, that's as an offense coordinator for 20 plus years, that's the one thing that was always nice. When you had a guy, when you were struggling, like top of my charts was a touch chart. And when I struggled, 3 and out, I would come back in and my guy on my phone would say, let's get a touch to whoever, right? Because maybe he can break a tackle and get you a first down or get you a big play. So that's the one thing they still don't have. And that's the one thing you would have gotten from Travis Hunter. And his success won't surprise me whatsoever. He's an elite talent, especially in space. And they'll do some cool things with him in the NFL. But, you got to kind of roll the dice. And if you're going to go with we're going to stop the run and run the ball, then stick to it. Obviously, for me, I want to see it in camp. I want to see them getting after it a little bit and being angry with each other.
Right. And Tim, like we talked about Thursday, this isn't just about Travis Hunter versus Mason Graham. This is Travis Hunter versus Mason Graham and kind of what the Browns do with all the other stuff. And most importantly, and we're going to talk about the quarterbacks and the decisions they made there later. Maybe one of those guys, maybe one of those flyers works. But ultimately, I think most people are looking at next year and what they do next year. If they get a franchise quarterback out of this move, it's especially if it comes with one of those first round picks that they're going to have next year, I don't think anybody's going to regret trading Travis Hunter, even if he's a great Pro Bowl player. Obviously, you'd still love to have him, but if they parlay this into their long-term quarterback future, that's why you take a risk like this.
100%. And I mean, we'll obviously talk about the two quarterbacks, later in this podcast. There's potential, I'm guessing. I know we haven't talked about if we're going to talk about 2026 QBs or whatever, but thinking about it more with who's available next year, I mean, there's logic behind it, no question about it. And you got to take the swings on the quarterback to try and hit on the quarterback. And I thought about this, and I'm going way back in time. The classic quote, I think it was from Machiavelli, that the ends justify the means. And with this trade, you gave up the Shohei Ohtani potentially of this draft in Travis Hunter, but what you got out of it was Mason Graham, your two running backs, and a guy you could take in the first round next year. And if Jacksonville has another bad season, say they're picking top 5, you could be in a position to have 2 top 10 picks, which either that's trade fodder to move up for a quarterback, or if one of them's high enough, one's going to fall in your lap, and then you draft your next offensive tackle for the next 15 years to pair with him. Or I would assume another defensive player in that position. But it gives you options. And if, say, the best case scenario possible happens, that either of the two quarterbacks the Browns draft turns out that they look like Bo Nix as a rookie, then all of a sudden you're in a position to really build out this roster around one of those two guys. So certainly it's playing the long game. But I think we all kind of understand that the Browns were really never going to be in a position where they were going to go from 3-14 to, 11 wins in 2025. That's pretty much unlikely. So I think fans don't like the long game. It's tough, especially with how 24 went. But I think it's smart understanding, value and those sorts of things. Because as we know with this Browns front office, value is such a big deal with them.
Yeah, I did feel like this trade in part was kind of a signal to what they've been telling us all offseason, is that this is sort of a 2-year build of this roster, a 2 offseason build. And that doesn't mean that they're going to go out and try to tank 2025. It just means that there's an acknowledgement that digging out from under this Deshaun Watson contract and kind of this all-in roster you built that never really came close to what you wanted it to do, it's not an overnight process. So it's sort of a 2-year reload of this roster. And if they, some things go their way and they win 9-10 games next year, great. But I think this trade acknowledged a little bit of that idea that this is sort of a 2 off-season, 2 draft build. Okay, let's move on to this next pick, because this is one, and we were talking about it in the media room. The pick of Carson Schlesinger. It surprised a lot of people. I'm going to say his last name 100 different ways this season. So this is what I said. Okay, this is not the pick I would have made. One of my guys went 1 pick later to the Houston Texans, and Houston did not hesitate to turn in that card. I think they were very excited that he got past the Cleveland Browns. But the way I could talk myself into it is, one, obviously he's one of the better linebackers in this draft. I think he was number 2 on the Beast, Dane Brugler's draft guide. Daniel Jeremiah said on the broadcast that he felt like there was a pretty big drop off after this pick. So maybe that's the play the Browns are making as well. And just kind of at its core, without knowing what Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah's future is, you have to answer the question, who's playing linebacker for this team in 2025? And Carson Schlesinger, as the number 33 overall pick, is going to have a chance to do that. So let's just start here, because I don't know how many people listening to this pod, at least prior to the draft, watched a lot of him. Lance, what sort of player is he?
Well, first, he ran a 4.7, but the thing that is really impressive to me about Schlesinger, also, if you want to hear something funny, watch me say his name wrong like 7 times when he got drafted, like in a row. Within like 10 minutes, I messed it up. So you're not alone there, Dan. But what I like about him best is that the ability for a linebacker to play in traffic is vital, right? And the idea of, you heard a bunch of people say he gets skinny. And that's what my dad, who was a linebacker in college, he always said, to get through a gap, you have to become skinny. And what that really means is you have to give just a little bit of surface area for that big offensive lineman to block. And he does an incredible job of when he gets to where he's going to be blocked in a gap, he kind of dips that shoulder and does not give that offensive lineman anything to block. Now, the other thing that's super impressive, everybody talks about JOK's ability to run. It's really not JOK's ability to run, which is incredible. But what JOK does is he recognizes and pulls the trigger. That's what Schlesinger does as well. So when you watch him on film, he reads what he sees in front of him, and then he's gone. So if you're thinking about the Browns scheme, and Dan, I go back to what you said, I use it all the time. The Browns linebackers covering kicks. There's a lot of reality to that, right? They have a gap responsibility. They don't have multiple gaps. So when they see something, they go, and that's instinctual stuff. I had him as the number one in terms of instincts. I actually had Jeffrey Bassa to be honest with you. I had Bassa ahead of him just because I thought Bassa was a better fit. The more you watch Schlesinger on film, the more you see why they like him. Obviously, I wanted Luther Bird in there. I thought Burden would have been a great pick. Dan, you're right. You would have had to block me if they went Bird in there. But that was when you look at it and what they're doing. That after that pick is when I started saying, you know what, they're saying we're gonna stop the run. And then when they got Junkins, they're saying, those first three picks are tough guys who can stop the run and run the ball and get you to second. So, everybody said, why not Henderson over Junkins? Junkins gets you to second six more than Henderson does. Now, Henderson's going to hit the home run bit more for you, but that's kind of the thought process. So the idea of shoring up the run, really tall, lanky kid, really instinctual, seems to love football. I wasn't nearly as high on him. You go back and watch film, you go, oh, okay, he's a pretty good player. He will fit the scheme for sure.
Yeah, Tim, my hope for this pick is that this is one of those, we always talk about, especially here in the AFC North, right? You always talk about, gosh, that was such a Pittsburgh Steelers pick. That was such a Baltimore Ravens pick, right? And it's because those teams know exactly what they want to do at every position. They know exactly what those players look like. And so if this pick works, if they did make the right choice here, it's going to be because they know exactly what a linebacker in Jim Schwartz's scheme looks like. And like Lance said there, it's kick coverage. That's a lot of what they ask their linebackers to do. Every guy I've talked to, Devin Bush is a guy I talked to last year. He kind of found a little bit of a boost to his career last year coming in here because it's really just the front causes chaos, and it's your job to go get the football. Go get the guy with the football. And Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah obviously thrived doing that. And so if this pick works, it's going to be because the Browns identified a Cleveland Browns style, Jim Schwartz style linebacker here.
No question about it. I think, when the pick happened, I know there were, Mary Kay was talking about potentially being an Ohio State running back, that they were going to offense early 33. So I think everybody was kind of stunned that it was another defensive player. And then you have a lot of draft analysts on Twitter be like, no, this guy's really good. Like, you don't understand. This guy is sensational. Like, you're talking a 242-pound linebacker, which I kind of surprised people call him slender. I mean, he's 242 pounds. Like, if 242 is slender for a linebacker, then what's JOK as far as his weight profile? I don't consider he's part of his issue. Part of the concerns with him and why he fell was because he was a smaller linebacker. But with Schlesinger, I mean, this is a guy that is incredibly productive. Went from being a walk-on at UCLA to having 136 tackles last season, a first-team AP All-American on a UCLA team that was 5-7. To do that on a team in the Big Ten that didn't go to a bowl game, I mean, that speaks volumes about the guy he is, and he seems like another one of those 3-down players, a guy who's got outstanding eyes, able to trigger and get to the football, and actually pretty good as far as tackling. Looking at the PFF draft guide, missed tackle percentage of only 7.6%, which is top 10 among linebackers. So it seems like he's pretty good at bringing guys down. And that size, I think, is good enough where he can really, run around, diagnose everything. It seems like his diagnosing skills, like Lance was talking about, are outstanding. And I think, the first thing I thought about when they drafted him was, is he an insurance policy in case Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah can't play in 2025 and going forward? So I think there's a lot to understand about Schlesinger when you kind of dive into it. And then you get into it, you see a guy who is kind of defied the odds. It goes back to the idea of this being a high character draft for the Browns. And The other thing that stood out to me when I'm talking about Carson Schwechter, looking up his relative athletic score, you mentioned the slow 40 time Lance. I look at the explosiveness numbers off the charts. And what stands out to me even more, his agility numbers. You look at them, they're both in the greens. You're talking like percentiles in the high 80s and the low 90s for agility. And for me, when you're playing linebacker, it's not just playing downhill. Can you play side to side? And if you have a guy that can go side to side with that kind of fluidity, not lose speed, and be able to track all over the field, no reason you can't be a 3-down linebacker. So certainly Schlesinger has a chance to be a pretty good contributor pretty quickly.
Okay, so I think we sort of need to look at this part of the draft collectively to really kind of talk about what the Browns did, the choices they made, because they did make some clear choices here. Obviously, Schlesinger going at 33 instead of taking a receiver or taking a running back there. Now, obviously, they turn around and 3 picks later, they take Quinshon Judkins. That's a choice too, right? Going running back there over another position. The Ohio State back that they chose, Travion Henderson, goes a couple picks later to the New England Patriots. One interesting thing, just a little nugget that we talked about in the media room, is there was a comp out there of Quinshon Judkins of Sony Michel. And it was funny because if we remember back in the Nick Chubb draft, Sony Michel went to New England, Nick Chubb went to Cleveland, and obviously things worked out much better for Cleveland than they did for New England. So hopefully for Browns fans, things aren't going to be flipped here with Quinshon and Travion. But let's spend a little bit of time on Quinshon Judkins, and then maybe we'll talk about some of the decisions the Browns made here. Lance, they used the word bell cow. Andrew Berry used the word bell cow with Quinshon. You mentioned when you were talking about Schlesinger, that choice of Judkins is your 2nd and 6 guy. He's a guy that's going to get you to 2nd and 6. He's a physical runner. He's a violent runner. I think it's splitting hairs a little bit with either of these running backs. It's kind of like, what flavor do you prefer? It's not. I think they'd have been fine either way. But with Judkins, is that why you think they took him? Because he is sort of that second and 6 guy, that bell cow number 1 back type of guy.
I think you said it best, right? So they didn't get the receiver. Then you look at the next couple picks. So I kind of thought about it after the next couple picks, but I do, right? So they've decided that they're going to get some young quarterbacks. They got some veterans. They didn't go get a receiver. The best way to help them right now is that they're saying we're going to play elite defense, like next level type defense, and we're going to help our quarterbacks out, and we're going to help the play caller out. And the best way to help a play caller out, without question, is to win on first down. Now, you will occasionally throw the ball, play action, things like that. Stefanski likes getting 13 personnel and split it out in 12 and all that kind of stuff. But the reality of football, and you saw this with the draft, is that if you get to 2nd 5 or 2nd 6, you are now dictating what happens next as an offensive coordinator. And what that means, for me, it means you dictate what personnel you want on the field from the defense. I will put my personnel group out there. I'm going to dictate what you do with it. Then I'm going to do what you don't want me to do, right? So if I'm going to put in 12 and you put in nickel, I'm going to run it down your throat. If I'm going to put in 12 and you put in base, regular 3 linebackers, I'm going to split these guys out. I'm going to split Njoku and Fannin out, and I'm going to throw the ball. So that's kind of what Kevin Stefanski's thought process, in my opinion, not getting receiver, going Judkins over Henderson, and then getting Fannin. We're going to get in 12, and we're going to dictate what you do, because now the offensive line is going back to what we do best. We might not be flashy, but we're going to be 2nd 5. That means they're not getting into those exotic looks where people standing up all over the place. You're going to get a base defense. Base defenses, they're easy to read for the quarterback, things like that. So it kind of snowballs and kind of scaffolds, in my opinion, on why they went with that pick. But Judkins, for me, he runs really well. He ran a lot better than I thought he would at the combine. But for me, all that kind of goes away. What he does is he's a great 2nd-level runner, but he's going to get you some big runs, but he's always going to keep you above the sticks, which is a quarterback's and a play caller's best friend.
Tim, how did you have these Ohio State guys ordered? Because I liked Travion more than Quinshon, and that's not to say that I don't like Quinshon. It's just, when I watched them both, I liked Travion more. That might have been my pick. How did you have these guys ranked?
Yeah, I had Travion ahead of Judkins, and a big thing I go back to, everybody's heard me talk about this like crazy. They're probably sick of me talking about explosive run rates. I'm pulling on my chart right now. I had Travion Henderson all the way up here at about 25.52%. Quinshon Judkins down here much lower at about 14.5%. 0.51%. That's behind what Chase Brown had in his. That's less than Chase Brown in his draft season, and I don't think Bengals fans are disappointed with what Chase Brown has become in 2 seasons. So from an explosive standpoint, yeah, you're kind of taking a step back between Henderson and Judkins, but I think as far as durability, bell cow type running back, I think Judkins has the ability to be a better version of that. And certainly it seems like a guy who really takes advantage of what's available to him from his offensive line for better or for worse. And the number one thing I've been saying all offseason, on top of whatever they do at quarterback, you have to rebuild this running game. The Browns last season, it's not just that they couldn't run the football well, it's at times they didn't try to run the football. It's they tried to throw way too many times with arguably two of the worst quarterbacks in football based on just those pure advanced numbers in 2024. So rebuilding this running game was a must, and getting a power component like Quinshon Judkins, who has demonstrated over 3 years high levels of productivity, combined with, like you said, Lance, surprising speed, it gets you in those numbers. And what Lance was talking about, that's what in analytics is called hitting the success rate. Is on first down, if you gain 40% of the yards, that means you're hitting that success rate number. And 40% of 10 for math is 4. 10 minus 4 is 6. So then you get to 2nd and 6. So that kind of works out right there. And Quinshon Judkins feels like that if you're not going to replace Nick Chubb, you want to at least replace the 2 things that he did incredibly well. He was physical and he was fast. So you replace them in essentially 2 running backs. And we'll get to Dylan Sampson later, but certainly I would imagine the Browns can give Quinshon Judkins, maybe not give him 300 plus carries, but kind of lighten the load a little bit like what Ohio State did with him. You saw the numbers kind of dip a little bit, including missed tackles for us. I think that were down from his last 2 seasons at Ole Miss, but you see a guy who is just tough-minded, physical, kind of your throwback AFC North running back. He just runs with violence and kind of a no-nonsense type of attitude, and I think that's something that, again, like I said with Cam Scatterbo a couple weeks ago, can be infectious for this run game.
So Lance, I'll ask you this because you were big on TreVeyon Henderson. He was your favorite back. He was your number 1 back in this class, not just your favorite Ohio State back. He was your guy. So I guess ultimately, do you think the Browns did the right thing here for them, or do you think they'd have been better off going with TreVeyon?
He was my number 1 guy, and I had him above everybody by a pretty good margin. However, I like plans. I like idea of you're creating a plan for yourself. Dan, you said it best about like the Steelers and the Ravens in terms of they have plans. And every time they pick, I don't know about you guys, but every time the Ravens or Steelers pick, I go, God, that's a Raven guy, or God, that's a Steelers guy, right? So you just have that vibe with so for me, this is a plan. This is saying I understand TreVeyon Henderson is a home run hitter. He maybe has, if we're going to go with this tough physical style, 12, 13, we're going to stick to it. I have no idea if that's true, right? None of us do. However, that does tell me that that's where they're headed. It tells me, so I do like the pick, because then you get Fannin, that tells me they want to go 12, and create some mismatches. But I like TreVeyon Henderson as a better back. However, I am big on Judkins in terms of getting first downs. For the Browns, I actually thought Caleb Johnson would be a good fit too, just because he's run that zone concept. He understands that's a really hard run scheme to learn if you've never run it, because you have to read the double teams and where things are going. So, but yeah, Judkins is going to get you to, 2nd 6. And I appreciate Tim making that sound much smarter than I said it. But yes, get to 2nd 6.
Well, I'm gonna have a shirt. I'm gonna have a shirt made for you, Lance. It just says there's gonna be one that says there's gonna be a players over plays shirt. You know what? We're just doing a whole orange and brown talk line. Players Absolutely. Over plays, 2nd and 6. That's what it's gonna be. Let's talk about these guys collectively. Let's talk about Dylan Sampson. And in the second part of the pod, we're gonna talk quarterbacks, but then maybe we can get into sort of some of the choices the Browns made as a whole in this draft. How they took 2 running backs, they took 2 quarterbacks. Some of what we thought about that, but let's talk about Dylan Sampson with Quinshon Judkins, because they did take 2 running backs. Right now, Jerome Ford obviously still in that room. This feels like Nick Chubb is probably not going to come back. And you kind of wonder, what's the point now? Why would you bring him back other than just a feel-good story? So if it is going to be those 2 guys, and Andrew Berry made it a point yesterday to point out, or on Saturday to point out, they thought he was maybe there's some untapped potential there in the receiving game for Dylan Sampson, which is interesting. Tim, how do these guys pair together? Because I think that's an important piece here, not just hey, here's Quinshawn, here's Dylan over here. I do think we need to talk about these guys collectively because these two, along with Jerome Ford, who's going to be a free agent after this season anyway, this is going to be your running game.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I want to put this out there right now. Anybody that thinks this is going to be a Thunder and Lightning tandem, anything like Lendell White, Reggie Bush, I think these guys are a little more similar than people realize. And when you actually look at some of the advanced numbers with Dylan Sampson, I got the PFF draft guide up here. He's actually top 10. He's actually number 4 last season in missed tackles forced and 10th in missed tackles forced per run. So you're looking at not one, but 2 guys who have the ability to break tackles. They do it in some different ways. You know, Sampson's got a nice little burst to him. He's compacted about 5'8", let me pull up the exact measurements, 5'11", 201. Not as big as Quinshawn Judkins, but certainly has the ability to get the top speed. And playing in a Tennessee system where, you know, you're going to face, you know, more wide open boxes, even though you're going to have a compressed defense in the middle and corners are going to be way outside because the receiver is going to be lining up all the way out on the perimeter. You're still going to face 6 and 7 man boxes. And Sampson, like Quinshawn Judkins at Ole Miss, was a bell cow and a guy who just really does a great job to find holes in the inside and the outside. And just his ability to get the top speed is really good. And what stands out about him is short yardage. You would think for a guy who's, you know, just shy, like in the low 4.4s of speed. When I say low 4.4s, I think it was like a 4.42 he ran at the combine. He's actually really good in short yardage situations. So you have 2 running backs who, even though they're different physically, they have similar play styles. So you can have some physicality, and yet with both guys, you can have a little bit of a home run ability, more so with Sampson, I think, than Judkins. But still, Dylan Sampson is a much more physical runner than I think he gets credit for.
It's interesting you bring up Reggie Bush because he's a guy that Dylan Sampson idolized growing up. That's mentioned on the Tennessee website. Asked him about it yesterday on our conference call with him. So, Lance, again, you've kind of been harping on this rebuilding of the run game, and you know the offensive line is something they're going to have to address at some point. But at least for now, at least going into 2025, they've got Jack Conklin, Wyatt Teller, Ethan Posick, Joel Bitonio, and then it seems like for now DeJuan Jones. So they have their 2025 line. Now 2026 might be a different story. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. If they really are just going all in on rebuilding this run game, which makes sense when your quarterbacks, when you just look at the quarterback room, I think it is important to not just look at Quinshawn, but to also look at I'm blanking on the name here. What Dylan Sampson, I keep wanting to say Dylan Gabriel, what Dylan Sampson brings to the room here collectively.
Well, you know, Tim hit right on the head in terms of being similar. I don't think they're, you know, everybody said he's a home run hitter. He's really a tough back. Now, the thing that I really like goes back. I was watching an interview with Derrick Henry the other day, and he said, you know, when he was in high school they, you know, gave him the ball and he ran left, or gave him the ball and ran right. And then he went to Alabama. He had to learn schemes and he had to learn things because he wasn't able to just do everything without help, right? Even though he's, you know, a Hall of Famer. That kind of reminds me of Dylan Sampson. The thing that stands out to me, I didn't watch a ton of them as compared to some of the other backs I watched. Now, obviously, I try to do my due diligence in terms of getting up, you know, 3 or 4 or 5 games in, watching cuts and things like that. The thing that really stings out to me is his ability to understand what the defense is doing and what the second level defenders gap rules are. And what I mean by that is you'll see him, if you think about like Le'Veon Bell, remember he used to kind of pause and then burst through the hole. And what he was doing is he was helping, you know, always hear the term quarterback friendly for a receiver. There's also something called being lineman friendly. And what he does very, very well, he's lineman friendly. So give you an example. The Browns run outside zone, right? They're going to run outside zone to the left with Jones and Bitonio. And that second level linebacker is in charge. You know, the guard and the tackle are in charge of the end or the tackle and the next level linebacker. Well, Dylan Sampson seems to know who's in charge of what. So what he'll do is he'll push that edge, make that linebacker go, or he'll slow pace it and make that linebacker stay in the gap, and it helps the guy getting off onto the second level. So when I watch him play, that's my second level comp. Now, his running style is not the same, but his ability to see what's going on in front of him and then make that explosive cut, short area burst kind of jump cut to where he's helped his offensive lineman. And you're going to, if you watch the Tennessee film, watch how when he makes his cut, you're going to see an offensive lineman just absolutely destroy a second level linebacker. That's because Dylan Sampson helped him out. And he kind of put that linebacker where he wanted to be so he could help his lineman out. Really like him, and obviously that'll carry over very well to the NFL.
Yeah, I wanted to pull up my notes on him here because I had watched a couple of his games earlier, long before the draft. And one of the things I have here is he's not impatient, but he's decisive. Kind of to your point, and this was interesting too. Dane Brugler used the word chaotic to describe him, and when you do watch him, there's some chaos to how he runs. So I think this is going to be a fun pairing. Let's talk about the other pick we want to get to in this segment. We will get to the quarterbacks in part 2 of this pod and a little bigger draft strategy as well. Harold Fannin. I thought this was really well done by the Browns. We've talked about this tight end group. There were a lot of day 2 tight ends that I really liked. Mason Taylor was my favorite. Elijah Arroyo is a guy that I really liked, and Harold Fannin was on that list as well. But you only get so many guys. You don't get everybody. And the Browns made their choices in the 30s to go with a linebacker and a running back. Like I said, maybe I'd have gone receiver, but I honestly wouldn't have prioritized a guy like Mason Taylor over some of the other options the Browns had there. So it's Harold Fannin. They stick at 67 and they make that pick. And Tim, as far as I'm concerned, as simple as it sounds, the Browns kind of did what they should have done there. They just took a guy that always sort of felt like a Cleveland Brown. They were patient. They waited. He came right to them and they picked him. This is one of those, like, yeah, I get it picks.
I mean, it feels like it doesn't get more, meant to kind of be, for lack of a better term, meant to be Cleveland Brown. You play your high school football, Canton McKinley, your home stadium is Tom Benson Hall of Fame Stadium. You go to Bowling Green, you're already wearing brown and orange to begin with. And then, you don't have to change any of those colors when you go play professional football with the Browns. So what I thought about when they took Harold Fannin is the idea that you need to come away with this draft with multiple starters. And for the Browns, more so than most other teams, they're a team that's going to start 12 personnel, 2 receivers, 2 tight ends on a running back, and then you need a number 2 tight end, and boom, you can almost maybe not insert Harold Fannin from day 1 as your starter, but he can be a starter certainly by the end of his rookie season. And I mean, the guy just has unbelievable production. I mean, it's rare that you have a tight end who leads the entire country in receptions and receiving yards, not just from the Mid-American Conference, but just in general. I mean, we're talking ridiculous production last season, 117 catches, 1,555 yards, 10 touchdowns. And he did it against teams on a schedule like Penn State and Texas A&M. He had great games against both teams. His signature play against Texas A&M, he catches a pass down the sideline and he's able to weave around a couple defenders, make a couple guys, turn around because he's just so agile, and his agility numbers are sensational. Like, he's got one of the best 3-cone short shuttle combinations of any tight end in this class. May not be super fast, but he fits under that 4.76 40 threshold that I've talked about before with tight ends. He's not necessarily a blocker right now, but he's so young. He's not 21 years old yet, that he feels like a great number 2 tight end that you could potentially put with David Njoku. You can flex him out into the slot, create some mismatches. And it feels like just a nice chess piece for Kevin Stefanski to really work with on this offense.
Yeah, I mean, just a pick that makes sense. Like Tim was saying, it feels like everything points to him being a Cleveland Brown. His background, although his brother was a Steelers fan. He said that they didn't watch a lot of Browns in his house growing up, apparently. And he also has not watched very much David Njoku, I guess. See, he admitted that on Friday night. So he'll get to meet David pretty quickly here. Still, to me, of all the conversations we can have about this draft, when you talk about, well, did they do the right thing at quarterback? Did they do the right thing at 33? Did they need to take 2? Any debate you want to have about this draft, I just think Harold Fannin is just sort of on his own over here somewhere. I don't think anyone is like angry about this pick. I don't think anyone is arguing like, well, they could have done something else here. I think this is probably, as we're recording this the day after the draft, the most popular pick the Browns made, and just the most common sense pick they made. Well,
it's the second part of kind of what I have, dissected from this draft. The first part was we're going to stop the run and we're going to run the ball. So that was after all picks were made. We're going to help the quarterback. We're going to run the ball. We're going to get tougher. We're going to do that. The next part of it was production over potential, right? And I was reading next gen stats, and I try to base everything that I see. You guys know, going in the draft, I try not to think about what other people say, because other people have their opinions. You don't want to get skewed, right, Dan? Like this, I want to go with what I feel. But the thing that I really liked, and it was next gen stats, they have the most in terms of tackles and touchdowns and interceptions and the measurables on both sides of the ball. The Browns drafted the guys who had the best stats, the best production coming into they had the most production of everybody in the draft for all, 4 players of the years in their conference, guys with great numbers. Now they all have potential as well, but you need football players. And Harold Fannin is a football player. And it sounds kind of weird, but Dorsey rubbed people wrong at times and things like that. But there's something to be said about, watch the film. The guy, I don't care what he runs. It's like when I watch Aeneas Peoples. You look at his measurements, they're terrible, right? I don't know, but watch him on film. He's pretty hard to block. But that's what I see with Fannin. He had 117 receptions. He had 1,500 yards. But what I like him most is that it tells me that, first of all, without getting the receiver, they're going to be in 12, a lot of 12. They can get a tight end wherever to put his hand on the ground if they want to go 13, because that guy doesn't have to do a lot in 13. Then you can move Fannin and Njoku around. But it tells me that they are pretty confident in Tillman. They're obviously they're pretty confident in Judy, and now they're confident with their run game. They're going back to what those offensive linemen do well, and now they got the 2 backs. And again, I said it earlier, what 12 personnel does is it allows Stefanski to dictate what you put on the field personnel-wise as a defensive coordinator. So I think it's a great pick, and it's all about production, right? He's a guy who just continuously produces against great teams. Not only did it in the MAC, watch the Texas A&M game, watch the Penn State game, watch the Texas A&M game, watch him block some of those studs from Texas A&M. He gets into them. Now he's got some technique work to do. But my last point on this was, I was at fault as a coach too. And my dad taught me this, and then listening to Jim Schwartz, it's so true. I don't care if he can't block yet. Don't draft a guy who you're going to draft as a receiving tight end and then be mad because he can't block. That makes no sense to me, right? Maximize, my dad always said this, maximize what your guys do best. Don't worry about, now work on what they don't do well, but don't be mad because Harold Fannin's not an inline blocker. You knew that, right? So use them as per, and the great teams do that. And the great coaches like my dad, I thought my dad was a great coach. That was his message, man. Make sure you maximize what they do well and then work on what they do poorly. Fannin is a guy who can create mismatches and be a nightmare against linebackers and safeties.
Well, and also, look, we know this about, like, David Njoku was not a great blocker when he got here, but physically had the tools. And it kind of comes down to the want to. Like, that's a lot of what blocking is. That's a lot of what run stopping is. There's so many things that we can talk about. We can cite all the analytics, all the numbers, all the film, but ultimately it just comes down to, do you want to do this? And run blocking for tight ends is one of those things. Like, do you have the want to? And I will say this, Tim, Andrew Berry pushed back a little bit on the idea that maybe Harold Fannin wasn't doing a lot of blocking at the college level. He didn't agree with that assessment when he got asked about Fannin as a blocker. So, look, he's a young guy. It might take time for him to become really great at it at the NFL level, but that's the point. You're not drafting a finished product. You're drafting a guy that 5 years from now, or 3 years from now, when you're thinking about giving him his next contract, it's like, hey, this guy is developing into what we envision him becoming, and the blocking part of it's a big part of it.
Yeah, again, he's not even 21 years old yet. So you're talking about a young man who's going to grow into his body. And slight detour here, but like one of the other draft, I'm a big hockey guy. One of the things I always love talking about is watching the NHL draft. They're drafting 18-year-olds, and you never know how those guys' bodies are going to transform over 5 years. NFL draft is a little different because these guys are much older. But I think with Andrew Berry, what we always talk about is they lean younger with these picks. And the fact that Harold Fannin is so productive at younger than 21 years old in a situation in the MAC where I know the MAC, it doesn't have, the elite athletes to say like the Big Ten does or the SEC does. But this was a guy who, even though he's not a finished product, is getting all the attention on him every single time they go play Bowling Green. They're worried about stopping Harold Fannin. They can't stop him. Now I know he's got some work to do with his blocking at some point, but he's going to go into a situation where there's not as much pressure to be great right away. He can grow into his body, work on some of those things he struggles with right now. But like Lance was saying, it's not about what you can't do. It's about the things you can do. And he's going to go into a situation where he doesn't have to be the guy. He's not going to have all this attention on him like he had at Bowling Green, especially last season when led the FBS in receptions and yards for everybody. And I just think this is a situation where it's a third round pick. Third round picks don't always hit. I kind of equate it to like they hit at the rate, Donovan Mitchell misses a free throw, for example. So if he kind of hits that tight end 2 ceiling, maybe where he has a career that's more productive than Harrison Bryant, this is a great pick, honestly, I think. And Fannin has the tools you look for in a tight end: enough speed, the ability to get open, and just the ability to create mismatches, because he's just such a different physical specimen than you see at the tight end position.
Okay, that's going to do it for part 1 of our pod. I know you're sitting there saying, come on, guys, talk about the quarterbacks. Don't worry, we're going to. That's coming up on part 2 tomorrow. Wanted to focus on some of the other things here today. So, Football Insider, cleveland.com/Browns, the blue banner at the top of the page to get involved with that. Find us on Instagram, Orange and Brown Talk. Our Twitter is Orange Brown Talk, and of course our YouTube. These pods all go up on our YouTube channel, and we got a lot of stuff from over draft weekend as well. Stand-ups, reactions, shorts, all that stuff. Cleveland.com/Browns. I'm sorry, that's Cleveland Browns on Cleveland.com. That's where you can find our YouTube channel. But I will just say Cleveland.com/Browns. Lots of great draft coverage over there as well. So we will be back tomorrow with part 2 of our pod with Tim and Lance.